the sociopolitical space plays a critical role in shaping the economy and other sectors or spheres of society. Every nation knows how important it is, and building institutions and ensuring that that space continues to lead and provide direction and leadership is very critical. And sometimes people may overlook it, but socio-political space remains vital for nations. And not even in a time like this, we have the global coronavirus pandemic, a time for leadership. Today on our July 3rd, 2020, the last edition for this week's Economy and Politics show, we'll be looking at the second half of the year, socio-political environment in Nigeria. What are we going to look at? What are the situations that will shape it? And what are the key issues that must be addressed? With me to discuss this is Mr. Malachy Ugwummadu, a notable lawyer and human rights activist, immediate past president of the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights in Nigeria, CDHR, and is here to discuss these key issues with us. Good morning, and nice to have you on the show, Mr. Malachy.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here. Good morning, viewers.
Yes, and thank you very much, Mr. Malachy. Looking at this global pandemic, it has really disrupted global economy. It has really rattled socio-economic activities and socio-political space, and it calls for building consensus across nations. This is a time for leaders in the political space to rally across party lines, to rally across ethno-religious divides, to pull together forces to say we need to come out from this challenge and we need to work together to achieve it. Are you seeing much of destruction in Nigeria, looking at the first half of the year in terms of our response on the political space?
Well, we are very certain that there's always room for improvement. Otherwise, the business of nation building will come to a stagnation. However, I like the way you went around your intro because the point has always been that popular aphorism, seek ye first the kingdom, seek ye first political stability and every other thing will follow.
Yeah.
That underscores the need to stabilize the polity, just so that you are able to galvanize and mobilize the energy of the people to be led in a direction that leads to productivity, a sustainable development, and above all, the realization of the need for democracy. So from that standpoint, the question was perfectly posed. Have we seen much of that? We must warn ourselves, namely that the COVID-19 has not just taken APC members, the last of which being notable, being Senator
Ugwummadu,
the immediate
governor of Oyo State.
But that does not mean PDP members, ABGA and co are not, victims of and casualties of this pandemic. The pandemic is also not a localized pandemic. It is a global watershed in the annals of the history of the world entirely. The flu of 1917 was not this ravaging and comprehensive.
Yeah.
It dealt a heavy blow on the global scene, but not in the sense that every community, every village, the simplest, smallest unit of human existence was affected. And therefore, life, whether we like it or not, will never be the same again. This, in our view, ought to shape a new thinking. It opened a new vista of identifying contemporary issues and devising strategies of dealing with them. But I think to answer your question pointedly is that it came as a surprise. I mean, Nigeria in particular was initially in a state of denial, and then suddenly realized that it was with us and had almost a fire brigade approach to begin to contend with the situation in a manner that, like I said, left a lot of room for improvement now. So what that means is that it is not what was anticipated or expected. To that extent, there were no prior preparations or efforts across party lines to build the kind of consensus that was required to be able to deal with this matter. But let's take a few things off the scene and be able to see clearer. One is that being a very novel problem and disease, you could see that a lot more persons gave this government the opportunity to drive the process. How do I mean? The NCDC, and the Presidential Task Force constituted immediately to handle this situation under the leadership of the Secretary to the Federal Government, Boss Mustafa, was given sufficient attention. Nigerians woke up from this deep slumber, found this strange pandemic, and then were prepared to listen, as it were, to these organs or institutions that have been created to handle this situation. And to that extent, a lot of communication, information, you are aware of the daily briefings, albeit that became very scary in recent times, as we are now counting above 26,000, with notable persons going down, thereby dispelling and dispensing with the rumors or disbelief or misgiving that this is not real. Today it's becoming real because community infections, is what we are handling now. And yes, and then people within communities are beginning to identify either loved ones or known faces who have been written. In a way, that has brought home, to a large extent, the reality of the situation. Now, I have talked about that opportunity, that belief that the Nigerian people gave these institutions. Again, there is a feedback mechanism. And I must commend the media for this, because in instances where there are a lot of misgivings, a lot of dysfunctionality in the system, you remember up north when a group of persons who have been isolated went on rampage, as it were, protesting that it doesn't seem as if this was real, because they have been kept here, told that they are infected, yet they have not felt differently from when they left home. No medication, no medical practitioners or medical workers to attend to them, and so on and so forth. Now, the media has helped to a large extent to do a feedback mechanism that creatively enabled a balanced assessment of the situation. But the point you are making, which is extremely very important, is has the political class in Nigeria, I like to call them political elites, because if you're talking of a class, you mean entirely different thing from what is happening. That has the political elite across board, particularly state actors, found and built a consensus around this crisis, began to think out of the box, and begin to locate the exit point and how to reorganize the Nigerian system, economy, polity, infrastructure, health, education, in a way, even transportation, technology, like you and I are doing now.
Yes.
I'm sure you would have summoned me to your station.
Yes.
But I have legitimate reason to resist you, which I didn't have much moral energy to do in the past. So, to what extent have these institutions, organs of government, state actors, party leaders across board began to see the need for a consensus around a new Nigeria, just as you necessarily must have a new world order smarting from this pandemic that has literally ravaged the entire globe. So that is left to be seen. Are we likely going to face and encounter the reality of that? Sure, it will come. The means of doing business will certainly change. The communication strategies and style will experience some shift. Education, as you're already witnessing,
Yeah.
we reopen? No, we shouldn't reopen. Some say we should reopen. Must take a new form. The IT world must necessarily now forcefully come to the front burner, and it will almost be indispensable now that you can, do anything without a proper IT system. So,
okay, Mr. Malachy,
I have my doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very clear what you said, that the consensus is left to be seen, but it's an opportunity for the political class to learn. And we expect that the president, who has so far tried his best to support the medical institutions, the Nigeria Center for Disease and Control, and Federal Ministry of Health, continue to give that support, but work with all governors across party lines to see that we can really address this pandemic. And if you look at established democracies like the US, you can understand and appreciate why we need consensus. I mean, where President Donald Trump will be pushing for reopening of the economy, and then the medical team led by Dr. Fauci will be warning of a second wave. On the other hand, Governor Andrew Cuomo of the Democratic Party of New York will be saying that no, they don't want to be reopened. It's very important that the people's interest, health, and economic balance comes to the fore. So I have taken note of that. And that's very important for our viewers and political stakeholders to take note of. In the first half of the year, we saw dynamics of internal political cohesion and internal democracy facing some challenges. And we'll still discuss about that. But looking at the Edo example, the ruling party and the whole things that are played out in terms of internal democracy, what for you stood out as an issue that has continued to linger and needs to be addressed? Having political structures that entrench internal democracy, not the perception or the over the years talk since 1999 of godfatherism, which continues to raise its head.
Well, I must thank you for the recap you did on my first intervention. I found that very, 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 very intelligent. It deals with all that I said, and they emphasize the need for data in moving forward. Now, to your question, in law, we go by a popular aphorism, and that is that nemo dat non quod habet. You cannot give what you don't have.
What you don't have. Yeah, that's a very powerful legal term.
Yes. So if you cannot practice internal democracy, there is no magic. There are no magic ones. There are no silver bullets with which you can deliver democracy. That is given. So democracy itself as an idea, as a philosophy of a marketplace, a forum where there ought to be an interplay of diverse ideas and an aggregation of and a consensus arising from that interaction, starts with internal democracy. Since in most civilized nations, in most democracies, that democracy is only conveyed through a purveyor, that is a political party. What is a political party? A political party is an association of persons from all walks of life with diverse opinion, but congregating around set ideas, philosophies, and objectives. It is an engine room where ideas are propagated, analyzed, synthesized, disaggregated, but ultimately, built into a policy that is sold to the electorate by way of manifestos and agenda. It is those ethos that attract people or repel people from the political parties that you have. God bless you. And the important point is, in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, I think I should be referencing section 222, if I'm not mistaken, 1999 as amended. There is no way by which you can get to God except through the Son, Jesus Christ. There is no way you can access power, which is the ultimate object of political parties, to access state powers. That is how you can distinguish it from civil society pressure groups. The difference is that the one is set up to access political power. The other seeks to...
Can be for advocacy, calling for transparency.
Sure,
pressure groups,
So once you have that in place, you must therefore come to terms and face the very important agenda of building internal democracy to secure, mark my words, legitimacy. Legitimacy is different from validity.
Legitimacy, validity. Okay, if you can quickly give us insight into that in just a few seconds.
I'll give you an insight to clear the air for those of you who are always curious. The Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is a valid document. Why is it valid? Every one of us, including your humble self, reads and quotes it and tell Nigerians to abide by it. We go to court to advocate it. But is it a legitimate government? We have always insisted it is not. Why? It is not because the process of its coming about was not participatory. It disconnected. There was no people-led, people-driven process to that constitution. And that's why we have insisted that that constitution, by its preamble, that said, we the people of Nigeria haven't agreed, give our people, that we said that is a lie unto itself. In other words, legitimacy is derived from the process, which must be participatory. Bringing that to bear with our discussion is, if you alienate the people from choosing their leaders within the political party that is the conveyor, that is the vehicle through which the democracy can be delivered, then you may be having a valid government, but you certainly will have in your hands an illegitimate government. So that's why I used that expression. But the point is simple. Democracy has not been defined in any better way other than government of the people, by the people, and what?
For the people.
Correct. So if that is taken as the best form of the definition of democracy, then there is hardly anything you will do in furtherance of that philosophy, in spite and despite the people. That's my point. So
Malachy, let me just
let me beg you. How did the chairman of a political party emerge? How did the candidate, gubernatorial, local government, presidential, House of Reps, Senate, how did these leaders emerge? Were they anointed, nominated, or did they evolve through the choice or choices of members of that political party? You hear the talk of direct and indirect primaries. You hear about that? The one is democratic, the other is not, even if they are both recognized by their constitution. So let me rest it there until I hear your next question.
Now, Mr. Malachy, I mean, I must appreciate the fact that you are part of those that led the movements for our democracy today, 1999. I mean, as a child, starting secondary school, we watched how you and the likes of Femi Falana Gani Fawemi, and Lisa Bakoba resisted military rule and insisted that democracy comes to play. And I must say that we appreciate your sacrifice. And today, as we enjoy this democracy, I'd like viewers to know that you are among those people that stood out to ensure that we have democratic governance, and we appreciate that. Now, let's go on to the fact that we need to define our political philosophy, like John Locke, or even from ancient place who talked about participatory governance. We have references for countries that have developed and are globalized economies. For example, China. China has a central party that runs its government, yet it's touted as an economy that has lifted millions from poverty. Singapore had Lee Kuan Yew, who was bullish in his governance, and we didn't even have a participatory position. Scale down to Africa. Rwanda is touted also as a very dynamic economy with good business reforms, but yet we see that Mr. Paul Kagame has continued to be in the helms of leadership, and the area of a very viral opposition, from my analysis, is not really there as expected. So my question to you is, based on what you talked about democracy, what kind of political philosophy do we need as we look at the Constitution? Are we going to look at the US type of democracy, which we seemingly want to practice? The president is very powerful, like you see President Donald Trump, or the UK kind of government where the prime minister is there, Mr. Boris Johnson, and then you had a head of government, that's the Queen, that's like a president. We need to also define our political philosophy. It's very critical.
Luckily for us, we have practiced both. The first republic was Republican.
Yes.
Thereafter, we've been doing presidential. Am I right?
Yes.
So we have,
now, yeah.
Correct. We have a history that will enable us assess the past and then project into the future. But let me thank you for reminding Nigerians of some of the most modest roles that people who most likely are being forgotten today made for democracy to thrive in Nigeria. In my own case, I was also a very young man in 1999, driven away from the university, no result, no degree, talking of University of Nigeria. As at that material time, I was in court, Federal High Court in Enugu, pursuing the university to release my degree results, which eventually I won. I went to the law school and became a lawyer. Even at that material time, we have thrown ourselves right into the rings. I was the National Deputy Secretary of JACO, led by Chief Gani Fawemi. It was the smallest. I was also a very senior officer in the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights, which I eventually led, like you did in your intro. But the point you made, which is the basis of your question, is what model of government do we need as a philosophy? I have pointed that we have tried it too. There are merits, there are demerits. With respect to parliamentary system of government, we observed that it was less expensive. And in several respects, it also reduced the rancor, because it is a government that evolves from the parliament. The majority in the parliament takes the lead and becomes the government. And there is this collective responsibility within them, almost with a broad line between the executive and the legislatures, because, as it were, Boris Johnson is first a parliamentarian before he became the Prime Minister of Britain. And if you recall, when David Cameron lost his campaign on Brexit. Yes, he both exited, not just as a parliamentarian, but also as the Prime Minister, on purpose to give Theresa May the opportunity to lead.
Good consensus and achieve.
I remember I did an article then to draw a disparity between their own David Cameron and our own David Mark. but let's leave that so that I don't get distracted with your question.
Yes,
so
yes.
We've seen parliamentary. We have thereafter, up to this moment, seen presidential. We have seen the merits. We have also seen the demerits.
Merits.
What is clear, yes, what is clear is that you cannot compare the size of the two governments. The one is slimmer, the other is bloated, but with a lot more energy and room for aggressive progress and development.
Yeah.
Now, that does not mean it always results in aggressive progress and development. It could, as we have seen in our climb, result in aggressive corruption and mismanagement.
Yes.
The last of which being the controversy that is just occurring between my good friend Festus Keyamo and members of the National Assembly.
On the
And I have told him, please, whatever it is, ensure that the purpose of that exercise, which is to bring some minimal, remedial, palliative, pedestrian succor to the poor masses of this country, is not lost in the heat of that controversy, because that's what we're going to. At the moment, the program, according to the National Assembly, has been suspended. Do they have the powers to do that? That is the debate for another day. But ultimately, we have thought that whether investigation or oversighting or whatever, the purpose for which this idea was introduced should not be lost. As of today, it is politicians fighting themselves. So it is not always the position, or it is not on any firm foundation that once you say presidential, then it encourages aggressive development or whatever. It could, like I said, encourage massive and aggressive reduction in our productivity, in the development, and even in the whole business of nation building. But the point is simple. Your question must be resolved around which one of these systems can be adapted into our own peculiar political circumstances and history,
and is sustainable.
And please, I want to remind you, as well as the viewers, that the China and Singapore you mentioned are not the kind of democracies that you see in both United States of America and in Britain or in France.
Yes.
These are peculiar brand of systems of government that borrowed from every aspect of civilization. Let me put it
mixed political systems,
and came to their respective countries and developed homegrown democracies. Recall that the Singapore you mentioned was merely an outpost of a colonized community. And it took the lockdown of that country by the great Lee Kuan Yew, like you mentioned.
Yes.
Dispensed with all the influence and distractions of the globalization we talk about today, and focused on that in that country. And today, Singapore
is a leading economy.
It's a leading economy. Short, the book from third world country to first world country by Lee Kuan Yew himself need to be read by our politicians. That is one. What about China? China makes no pretense about their communist tendency.
Communist Central Party.
The leading political party bears that appellation as an indication that the tough man in Russia, Vladimir Putin.
Putin just got an extension in 2063. So these are that's what I'm saying, that we really need to define. But let's go on quickly to something I know will be of interest to you: the autonomy that was signed by the president for State House of Assemblies and the judiciary. And let me just bring this little experience to you. I remember my dad's very good friend in my state. Yes, my dad's very good friend, who was a former chief judge in our state, had this encounter with the then military governor. There was a ruling in courts, and that ruling at the end favored the masses, people that were driving what we call the Okada. And so the military governor was so angry, and he now withdrew the allocation to the judiciary, took their official cars. I could imagine judges having to take Okada to their offices. I mean, that was not a very good experience. I remember the chief judge sharing his pain with my father at that time. Now today, fast track over 20 years now, we have the autonomy. How can this be leveraged to ensure that there's accountability at the subnational level, where people are now beginning to focus on, which is very important in our country's political stability?
Okay. Again, that's a very important question. I think that the idea was beautifully conceived, well thought out. Don't forget, this particular president had, in the course of his long campaign for to get to power, had made very serious, sensitive statements regarding the judiciary.
Yeah.
Now, being a product of that experience, I think he definitely knows where it pinches. To that extent, I like to be charitable to him as the head of the executive in conceiving that idea that this is a situation that must be handled just so to give effect to the very important sensitive role of the judiciary in any democracy. Indeed, it is created in Section 6 of our own Constitution, but it plays by far more important roles in stabilizing the polity than the executive or the judiciary. The executive proposes, executes, the legislature makes law. At interval, they even quarrel.
Yes.
Like they are quarreling now. KMO represents the executive.
Yes.
The
National
committee
Assembly,
represents the National Assembly. There is a clash. You will not be too surprised if I tell you that it could.
Can you hear me, Mr. Malachy? For our viewers, Mr. Malachy Ugwummadu, just to recap, is a lawyer and human rights activist.
He was immediate past president of the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights and has been speaking on the issues around building political consensus for Nigeria as we enter the second half of this year, particularly navigating the disruptive COVID-19 pandemic. He's also led by the issues around legitimacy and validity around internal democracy in political parties, which have impact on our democracy. He's also given his perspective around evolution of our democratic system, looking at democracies or political systems of nations that we tout as very developed and transformed, like China, Singapore, or the issues of whether we should go back to the parliamentary system which we practiced in the First Republic, which is the system of the United Kingdom, our former colonial masters, or continue with the presidential system, which is the United States. He says Nigeria should be able to align with what is in tune with our realities as a nation. Don't forget, Nigeria has over 400 ethnic nationalities and 6 geopolitical zones, taking that to consideration. And then around the issues on autonomy for our judiciary and the State House of Assemblies, for the first time, he's charitable to this government for taking that decision because it will help to strengthen democracy and bring the balance, checks and balances across the three tiers of government, three levels of government in democratic political analysis, which are the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Of course, these conversations will continue in the course of this month, because we're into that political season where we'll have gubernatorial elections in Edo and Ondo State, and that will be a foretaste of how strong our political institution, our democratic practice, and indeed our political culture has evolved as a nation. And note this very well, that our political class is being called upon to step up beyond party lines, beyond ethnic lines and religious lines, to lead our nation, to give direction, and also to work together for the interests of citizens. He's also led to bear the concerns over the 774,000 jobs which the federal government rolled out in its plan. These jobs are for those in the poor or mass citizens category, and each local government is to have 1,000 slots. The Minister of State for Labor, Mr. Festus Keyamo, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, had engagement with the House Committee on Labor over these issues, and so far, because of the altercations and perceived misunderstandings, it has been suspended. So we call on the political class, both the executive and legislature, to revisit this issue and ensure that it's resolved for the interests of Nigerian citizens, because they are there for our interests, not for their interests. And it's very important that what is paramount to move Nigeria forward is at the front burner of our political system and approach, and not for the interests of the few. And that will be all for this edition of Economy and Politics Show. You can see now that when you have political stability, you can achieve scale in economic development and growth. We hope that that happens, because when there's political stability and cohesion and the consensus, indeed Nigeria can navigate the worst level of crisis, and that is what we expect. Join our website, www.proshenji.com, to watch our videos, read our news reports and analysis. And we just want to wish you a very interesting weekend, but join us from Monday next week as we continue this conversation. Till we come your way again, thank you for watching. Have a nice time. And don't forget, by 10 a.m., we would have our market review. You don't want to miss it. Stay safe.